In medieval German literature, Siegfried was the hero of Nibelungenlied, a famous poem composed in the 12th century. Siegfried had an almost invulnerable body because as a youth he had been bathed in dragon's blood. Dragons of myth have always possessed magical powers, but this is not a story of ancient myth. This is a scientific journey, an adventure, if you will, to a small mysterious island called Komodo, the land of the Komodo dragon. Our heroes are not knights in shining armor or characters from a fairy tale. They are doctors, veterinarians, scientists, and zookeepers, all on a quest to capture dragons and to find out if there is indeed some magical power in the blood of these dragons. The Komodo dragon, more properly Varanus komodoensis, is one of nature's most deadly creatures. There have been at least 7 reported human deaths from Komodo dragons on these islands. The dragon is basically a lazy creature. It prefers not to fight with its prey. A dragon will lie in ambush or move slowly through the underbrush, sneaking quietly up on some unsuspecting animal. Then, the dragon will strike out with one slice of its razor-sharp teeth. Once the dragon has bitten an animal, it may actually allow it to run away. You see, the dragon's bite contains something deadly. It could be a toxin, endotoxin, venom, a virus, or deadly bacteria. But the animal will die a slow, painful death within the next 72 hours. The dragon just waits for the animal to die and then feasts on the rotting carcass. Scientists aren't sure what kills the victim, but they suspect the Komodo dragon's mouth may be full of virulent bacteria. The question scientists want answered is, if the dragon has this mouthful of bacteria, deadly enough to kill a water buffalo in 72 hours, why doesn't it kill the dragon? As much as 20% of a dragon's diet is other dragons, and their gums bleed constantly, tainting their blood with the poison saliva. There must be something in the dragon's immune system that protects the dragon from the bacteria. Because of overuse and misuse of current antibiotics, bacteria is developing resistance to them at an alarming rate. Scientists are hoping that the secret in the Komodo dragon's immune system can be used to help win the war against bacterial infections. Enter Terry Fredeking, the owner and president of Antibody Systems Incorporated, a small company housed in this building in Bedford, Texas. Terry's company specializes in something he calls expeditionary biology. Most people would just call it crazy. For his missions, Terry has, for example, traveled to Australia to the den of a Tasmanian devil, gone into rivers in Guatemala to collect blood-sucking leeches, and into a dark, damp cave in Mexico to capture deadly vampire bats, all in the name of science.
Antibody Systems is a difficult company to describe, but basically it's a 25-year-old biotech company that specializes in vaccine research. Along the way, we've been required and asked by pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies to assist in locating rare and unusual proteins found in nature. Those proteins then are bioengineered into new drugs and new medicines for man.
Terry Fredeking came to me and asked me to get him a good place to go in the world and to look for something really important. So I started looking in the literature and I found the Komodo dragon was a pretty good possibility for having an antibacterial component in its blood. And I gave him a call and told him, hey Terry, you want to go to Komodo dragon hunting?
Terry has never been one to turn down a chance for an adventure.
After looking at several species of animals, we determined Komodo dragons might be the best subject. They were isolated on an island for tens of thousands, if not millions of years, so they're possibly genetically not susceptible to bacteria, but what we really think that there's something different about the species that we can learn from to make an antibiotic.
Terry decided he would need to collect blood, tissue, and saliva samples from living, breathing, and deadly dragons in the wild, so that the scientists could examine them in the lab.
The wounds of that animal will generally lead to fatal
In order to complete a dangerous mission like this, Terry had to assemble just the right team with just the right skills. For this mission, he enlisted the help of a crew of experts.
To block septicemia, dragons may...
Dr. Putra Sastrawan from the University of Udayana in Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia. Putra has dedicated most of his life to studying the dragons and worked with Dr. Walter Offenberg, one of the foremost experts on Komodo dragons. The team veterinarian is Dr. Don Gillespie from the Kansas City Zoo. Don was selected for the team because he is an expert on reptiles. He is responsible for making sure the samples are taken safely and handled properly. Not many people have the title Dragon Keeper on their resume. This is Johnny Arnett, the Dragon Keeper for the Cincinnati Zoo. Johnny's job is to help with the attempts to capture the dragons, and he is also in charge of safety for the crew. Dale McGinnity, a herpetologist, is from the Nashville Zoo and an expert on snakes and reptiles. The island of Komodo is said to have more poisonous snakes per square kilometer than any place else on Earth. Dale will identify any snakes the crew comes in contact with, and he will also help capture the dragons. For a mission this dangerous, you need a good doctor on hand. Terry Fredeking chose Dr. Lori Gazelle. Dr. Gazelle is no stranger to excitement. She is an attending emergency medicine physician. And in addition, she is the medical director for the Center for Hyperbaric Medicine and a toxicologist at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. She's part of the team the Cincinnati Zoo calls on if a zookeeper gets bitten or poisoned. The problem facing Terry's team is, how do you collect samples from a 9-foot-long, 300-pound deadly dragon without hurting it or getting hurt yourself?
The animals were so accessible to us because they were out in large numbers out in the open. And we debated whether to use a variety of injectable or gas anesthetics, some of which were clearly not needed for the number of fairly superficial samples we were really taking. And after all, even the skin biopsies we could take with a careful preparation and just a local anesthetic. It wasn't just a question of the anesthetics, but also the recovery time. Because unless we had specialized recovery facilities, you open an animal up to attack if they're sedated or sleeping, and other hungry Komodo dragons that are in the area. So in terms of a field situation, we could find no satisfactory anesthetics that immobilized the animals for a short time and then had a quick recovery afterwards. So especially with some of the specialized restraint equipment, we could handle the animals effectively, safely, get our samples, and let them go.
The Komodo dragon has been placed on the endangered species list because they only exist in the wild on these 3 islands: Komodo, Flores, and Rincha. There are estimated to be between 5,000 to 7,000 dragons on these islands, but the area is volcanic, and one natural disaster or the outbreak of a disease could eliminate the entire population.
We had some pretty specific conservation goals when we started this study. Of course, we had some general ultimate medical applications we hope to get out of this study of wild Komodo dragons. But from a conservation standpoint, the fact that we wanted to see what this animal's status was in the wild, it occupies such a limited range, particularly volcanoes in the region, it's located right in the Ring of Fire, could affect this animal's very small range very quickly. And suddenly captive management, both in Indonesian zoos and American zoos and zoos in Europe around the world, would become a really prime focus for keeping this animal alive on the planet Earth. We cannot manage our animals in captivity till we know what's normal for the animals in the wild.
Terry's team met in a hotel in Bali, Indonesia. There they planned strategy and discussed the problems and dangers they were about to face.
very safe expedition. We've reduced it as much as we possibly can unless we make a mistake in the field. Before every expedition, there's a moment of tenseness, especially when you're in a group of strangers. You're not sure how strangers will interact with the rest of the people and the situations that may occur. Every person, I believe, before they go on one of these expeditions has a moment of pause in their mind before they step on that plane, before they step on that island, concerned about the unknown. Once you're there and you're comfortable in the setting, it's a different situation. But the night before, there's always a jitter that goes on in your heart.
For the last leg of their trip, the team takes a small prop plane to Labuan Bajo on the island of Flores. For Johnny Arnett, who is not afraid of dragons but does have a fear of flying, this is the scariest part of the journey. The crew will stay on the island of Labuan Bajo and make the trip to the Komodo Island in the morning and back at night.
All right.
It's a very treacherous journey in a small wooden boat. This is where the deep Indian Ocean meets the shallower waters of the South China Seas. The result is massive amounts of water being forced through the narrow waterways between the islands. These seas full of riptides and whirlpools can grab a boat and spin it like a leaf in the wind. They are said to be the most dangerous seas in the world. During this 2-hour boat ride, the crew sees very few signs of life and no signs of modern man.
Going to Komodo Island is always a magical experience. There's something about the place. It's eerie. You're passing other islands, and you even pass islands that have Komodo dragons on them. But when you see Komodo, it just seems to have a different atmosphere. It's a very mysterious, strange, magical place.
My impression of Komodo Island is just like the 1933 movie classic King Kong. And the first time you go on the island and see that animal moving around that big, it's just like being in the middle of a dinosaur movie.
During the dry season, the Komodo dragons lose much of the lush green cover they depend on for their surprise attack. This is the end of the dry season, and the dragons are starving. The Komodo National Park Rangers will make the captures with assistance from Johnny and Dale. The rangers are concerned that the dragons' hunger may make them more aggressive. They decide to start with the dragons near the ranger station. Almost hidden from view, a small Komodo dragon is spotted lying behind a tree. The small dragons will be easier to handle once caught, but they are much faster, which could make them more difficult to capture. Komodo National Park Ranger Louis Cruz decides to give this one a try, so with the noose in hand, Louis cautiously begins his approach. The dragon spots Louis and begins to carefully move away. Komodo dragons are at the top of the food chain on these islands and are not used to being hunted. The dragon decides to try and get away rather than fight and successfully slips through the noose. The rangers reset the noose and prepare to try again. The smaller one has run off, but all the commotion attracted a larger one into the area. dragon tries to get away rather than fight. As if the fear of being bitten wasn't enough, the rangers also have to worry about the other end of the dragon. The dragons have the power to break a leg with one quick crack of their tail. Finally, Lewis manages to hook him, and the fight begins. Something unexpected happens. Two other dragons, hearing the commotion and thinking the dragon has a kill, come in for their share. While Johnny and some of the rangers restrain the captive, other rangers fend off the hungry scavengers. The dragon snorts angrily as the rangers try to secure it for the doctors. Once it is restrained, veterinarian Don Gillespie anesthetizes the area, then cuts and removes a small skin sample.
We've got problem with the saliva.
The scientists want to study the structure and chemistry of the skin and see if it contributes to the apparent bacterial resistance of the Komodo dragon.
Itu untuk Jawa itu kalau di Jawa itu.
The dragon is surprisingly calm, and Don works quickly.
Get a really good cut, that whole section will lift right out of it.
After the sample is removed, it is placed in a small container to be taken back to the lab.
I have thumb forceps, it makes it a little bit easier.
Don then closes the wound.
We're coming from both edges. We'll keep it out of the dirt. We do 2 twirls around, pull like that. The thing about it is the suture material, unless you pull down on the knot tightly right here at the last, it'll come loose. So we tie 4 throws. Then we get a centimeter distance.
You'll see that stitch in there up to 2 months later, but it's okay. It's not going to cause a problem.
And eventually it'll come out. It's absorbable suture. We never put any stitches. We have to take it.
Well, how does a Komodo dragon feel when you touch it? First, you kind of feel privileged if you had a chance to work on an animal like that. So it's kind of a special thing, maybe even if it's in your own mind. Surprisingly, the big claws that you see and the skin on the legs is actually not that rough or tough. The claws look big, but they don't have quite the feeling of texture or sharpness, even though they certainly appear like it, as that of like a lion or a leopard or a tiger. But the main skin on their body is just like a coat of chainmail. It's just absolutely thick with these osteoderms or bony plates in the skin. And your skin biopsy instruments just bounce off it. It was so tough.
Don places an antibiotic on the wound, even though the dragons seem invulnerable to infection, because, as Don puts it, he doesn't want to be the first to give them one. Don then spreads insect repellent around the area to keep off the ticks and flies.
I'm sorry.
Okay, where are we headed next? To back?
Any more?
Okay, let's bring. Yeah, we do blood. Do blood leg.
When all the tests have been completed, the rangers begin carefully untying the dragon. This has the potential to be as dangerous as the capture. The rangers are not sure what the dragon will do once it is released. It could decide to turn around and attack its captors. The release has to be timed so that all the rangers let go at the same time.
He just had a nice little physical. He's healthy.
The dragon saunters away slowly, indignant but unharmed.
One big dragon.
Terry and the team rejoice at the completion of their first successful capture.
The other way by the dragons. Well, you had a hold of one. It's kind of like having a hold of the devil's tail.
The small one has wandered back into the area, and the rangers decide to try to capture it again. It is believed that the little ones possess less poison than their elders, but they can still be just as deadly. Once again, this one really puts up a fight. In the commotion, the dragon with lightning speed manages to nip one of the rangers on the thumb. This is when it's good to have a medical doctor on hand.
When he was originally bitten, we were concerned that maybe it had been a deep bite that could have drawn blood, which could potentially injected whatever the dragon has in their mouth, whether it's a toxin, a bacteria, an endotoxin, or a virus that can cause him to become sick. We were concerned that he might have gotten exposed to whatever it is that the dragon carries. Fortunately, however, this ranger only had a superficial wound, didn't actually even break the skin very much. We took care of him by cleaning it, put an antibiotic ointment on it, and then covered it up so to prevent further contamination, further exposure for whatever the dragon might carry. And then we were going to follow him to see what would happen and potentially put him on some other medication if he should develop a problem. But he was extremely lucky.
Lucky may be an understatement. The dragon's mouth has 32 razor-sharp teeth, which are serrated along the back edge and capable of slicing through buffalo hide. Because of the remoteness of these islands, even with a doctor on hand, a serious bite from a dragon or a snake is potentially fatal. Lori was on the other side of the world from her life flight helicopters and trauma facility. The rangers stand guard because the commotion of a capture has once again brought other dragons into the area. After testing the dragon, the rangers prepare for the release. Tensions are high. This one has already proven itself to be aggressive, and the small ones move much quicker. Fortunately, he just wants to get away. It hasn't rained in more than a month. The park rangers have built this watering hole for the Komodo dragons so they don't overheat or die of thirst. These dragons are cooling off in the only fresh water left on this desiccated island. Just about 30 feet away, 3 deer approach in search of water. The deer know the dragons are there, and the dragons know the deer are thirsty. And so, the waiting game begins. The famished dragons patiently lie in and around the water hole, silently waiting to see how close the deer will get. The barge deer cautiously circle the hole. They can smell the water. Slowly, they begin to gather their courage as they edge closer and closer to the water, wanting desperately to get a drink. In anticipation, the dragons have begun to salivate. Then, for the first time in 3 months, Mother Nature has decided in favor of the deer. The deer quickly drink from the newly formed puddles and run off. Komodo dragons will have to wait to eat another day. The next dragon is a big one and is easily noosed, but at more than 250 pounds, the dragon is so strong it drags the ranger across the field. The dragon wedges itself against a tree, so the rangers decide to restrain it and move it to a safer and more open area.
Are we having fun yet?
In order to reduce the risk of another bite, the rangers use duct tape on the dragon's mouth. Lori cleans and preps the tail so Don can collect the blood sample. All the while, a large dragon is sitting about 30 feet away watching the group closely. Collecting blood from a dragon is not easy.
You're going into the middle of a big, very large tail, so it's not like hitting a vessel right under soft human skin. You're going through bony plated skin, you're going through very tough muscle, you're having to blindly feel where the tail vertebrae are and go to the very center of that.
Putra collects saliva from the dragon's mouth on cotton swabs. These swabs will be used to build bacteria cultures on petri dishes back in the lab. The dragons are numbered before they are released, so they won't be caught twice.
We were here, and then we will follow this 2.5 kilometers trail up to the former feeding station or something, which is not happen now, but we will go to this place and we will follow the other trail on the way back home.
Okay, ready? On the way, be quiet and not smoking. And now we go.
Since so many Komodo dragons were around the ranger station, the crew decided to travel deeper into the island, hoping to reduce the problem of other dragons approaching during the captures. The group has good reason to be cautious. This marker is placed in memory of Baron Rudolf van Redding Bibereg. The Baron has the distinction of being the first recorded Westerner to be eaten by a Komodo dragon. The Baron was tired and sat down to rest, telling the rest of his group to go on without him and pick him up on the way back. When the group returned, the Baron was nowhere to be found. An exhaustive search turned up only his hat, his camera, and a bloody shoe. Komodo dragons aren't the only danger visitors to this island face.
Komodo has one of the highest populations of venomous snakes in the world. When walking through the backwoods on Komodo, you're almost never going to see a snake unless you're really looking. That's the problem, is when you don't see a snake. If you accidentally step on one or put your hand on a branch where a tree viper is, that's how you get bit.
Johnny was growing increasingly concerned for the safety of the crew.
We were a little bit taken aback and surprised by the fact that the other dragons were hungry and were rushing in. Every time that we captured a dragon, they were rushing in to share a meal. They thought that it was a kill rather than what we were doing. And dragons do share meals forcibly. I didn't know if they wanted to eat the dragon or me. I wasn't quite sure.
The rangers walk right up to the next dragon and place the noose around his neck. He seems more annoyed than anything else. Until the rangers surround him, then he begins to fight. Once again, the commotion immediately causes other dragons to charge the group.
One of the reasons we saw dragons tending to congregate around every capture we made was the simple fact that Komodo Island is a very dry island 8 months out of the year. We arrived at the end of the dry season. At that point, all the prey species for small dragons, medium, and large are just non-existent. So once we restrain one of these animals, a group of people, a lot of noise, the other Komodo dragons in the area would expect a prey had been caught and that they were going on to their next meal. And since meals may be hard to come by this time of the year, they're just driven by hunger. They weren't really driven by aggression, it was just they're hungry.
While some of the rangers fight off the hungry dragons, others work to get the captive dragon ready for testing. This spreads the manpower dangerously thin. Don uses a pulse oximeter to try and measure the heart rate and the oxygen content of the dragon's tissue. This device depends on being able to transmit light through the skin to a sensor on the back of the clamp. Unfortunately, the skin on the dragon is too thick to be translucent. 4 dragons had now been safely caught, tested, and released, but Johnny feels the team is pressing their luck.
This is unbelievable. You know, you're messing with one dragon, the other one's trying to eat you.
Well, there's a higher risk doing it right now by watching your back. You know, it's not one-on-one.
Well, but you got to think of the risk of the dragon, and that's.
Well, the dragons are important.
Well, I agree.
I think we have kept them off twice, and I just think.
You're busy and intense on the medical procedures, but these guys are hungry and they want to come and eat something, and you know it's not fun.
Yeah, and you're probably what they like to eat.
They look for lunch. That's right. I want to eat lunch.
Johnny, I can have
After reviewing all the options, the team decides to try to bring the dragons into the fenced-in viewing area. It was built to protect tourists who travel to Komodo to see the dragons.
I told you to bring some more rangers.
The next dragon is quick and really wants out of there fast. As with all the other captures, other dragons immediately begin to move in on the group. This time as planned, the rangers who capture the dragon secure it and carry it off to the fenced-in area. The other rangers once again had to fight off the extra dragons, but only until the crew is safe inside the fence. Once inside the fence, the crew can safely do the testing without having to constantly watch their backs. Exact measurements are taken and recorded of the captured dragons. This dragon has been salivating, and combined with the constantly bleeding gums, it provides a lot of blood and saliva. Once the testing is complete, the rangers quickly release it. The dragon seems pretty nonchalant as he slowly walks away. This plan had worked well because this dragon was small enough to carry. The next one the rangers want to capture is too big to carry. They decide to use a dead fish as bait to lead the dragon into the fenced-in area. The danger with this plan is, now the team is in a confined area with a hungry dragon which is not restrained. Conveniently, even after the dragon is noosed, his only concern is trying to get to the bait. Just outside the fence sit two other hungry dragons, drawn by all the commotion and the stench of the bait.
Any more?
Don hit the vein solid on this dragon, and it is providing a lot of blood. Putra and Lori place the samples in vacuum tubes, which are quickly frozen in liquid nitrogen. The rangers release the dragon, and it quickly walks away. The next day, when the crew arrives, they find two hungry dragons closing in on a deer who was dying from a previous bite. The bite has taken its toll on the unlucky victim. The deer has gone blind and is barely able to stand. The dragons can smell the festering wound and are already salivating in anticipation of their next meal. They know death is not far away and begin to circle the suffering deer. The dragons are starving, and their patience is running thin. Uncharacteristically, the dragons keep approaching the deer. Normally, dragons will wait for the animal to die, but this voracious dragon, sensing that the deer didn't have much fight left, decides to speed things up. The deer makes a last valiant attempt, but lacks the strength to fight or run. Once the first dragon makes the attack, the second one comes in for his share. And the two of them make pretty quick work of finishing off the deer. This could be the dragon's only meal for months, and they gorge themselves. Finally, the heat overcomes them, and they move to the shade to take a break. Some of the island's scavengers immediately move in. boar cautiously approaches and steals a scrap. He knows this meal could have just as easily been him. The crew really wants to capture a young dragon to compare its samples with the samples from the older ones. Lewis took on this challenge and chased this small one around in the hot Indonesian sun for more than an hour before it finally sought refuge in a tree. This is the natural place for it to run. As soon as a baby dragon hatches from its egg, it runs for the trees. Adult dragons will eat a young dragon if they can catch it. Young dragons spend their first 2 to 3 years living in trees and eating insects, birds, and geckos. The rangers decide to noose the dragon in the tree. The dragon doesn't try to climb higher or make any attempt to run, but this little guy isn't ready to give up yet. The ranger pulls him from the tree, and he comes down fighting. He instantly charges after Lewis, mouth open and ready to take a bite. Lewis quickly throws a net into the dragon's mouth. This slow-motion replay shows just how close this youngster was to having a leg of Lewis for lunch. Even though this dragon charged after Lewis, he is not angry with the dragon. The Indonesians have a tremendous amount of respect for the animal they call Ora. The dragon is taped and taken to a shelter out of the hot sun for testing.
Stitches.
While Putra collects the samples, Don decides to try again to get a pulse oximeter reading. He is hoping that the skin around the mouth of the small one is thin enough to be translucent. Don's hunch is correct, and he gets the reading he is after. This is a rare opportunity to get a normal reading from a dragon in the wild that is not anesthetized. This dragon had been so fast and difficult to capture that the rangers decide to try and calculate its speed. They place a marker in the sand and measure the time it takes the dragon to pass a tree 30 feet away. Their rough calculation estimates the dragon's speed at somewhere around 25 miles per hour. The crew heard stories of a man from a nearby village on Flores who was bitten by a Komodo dragon and lived. Since there is no known cure for a Komodo bite, the crew would like to try and find out how this man was able to survive. They decide to travel to his village and meet him. The people of this small farming village live among the dragons who sometimes prey on their livestock. The crew met the villager on the road, and he invited them to his house to tell his story.
Komodonya diukur oleh PPA itu waktu.
The villager heard his dogs barking late one night and went out back to see what was happening.
Sudah berapa dia tangkap kerbau itu? Dia stun bentuk kaki 3 itu. Mau terkam saya. Orang bilang keras di situ, tapi itu karena parang tidak ini. Tapi kalau parang tajam begini Pak, bukan keras sebetulnya. Akhirnya dia lemah, sehingga saya ambil parang cincang dia mati.
Then after, it's okay, boleh dia kasih keluar.
This is the native knife to praying. It's a beautiful one.
From what we could get from the story that the villager told us about his bite was that he was bitten and then had to travel a long distance to get to what their medical care center was, which apparently was a shack, had a nurse that took care of him. From what we could understand was that he was there for many months. What happened during that time we don't really know, because he really doesn't know what happened to him. Why he didn't get sick and die, which is the classic story that surrounds a Komodo bite, I can't answer that. There's lots of questions about the Komodo dragons, about what they do, how they poison us, which we don't know, which is exactly why we're doing this project.
Duduk lama. Ya, duduk lama.
After sitting too long.
Dan jalan terlalu ini.
Right. The damage that he's done is probably going to be permanent damage that's not going to go away. It's going to end up, it's pain. He's going to have pain that can shoot down through here. He can have tingling and that numbness that he gets in his foot when he's resting too long and sitting. That is never going to go away, and it's from the bites that he's got because he cut the nerves, cut the muscles, cut the tendons, and all the tissue in here. There's so much damage.
The crew built a small field lab in the hotel on Labuan Bajo to work with fresh samples.
Some of the work we had to do on the island of Komodo itself, because work on fresh blood is mandatory for things like cell counts, preparing blood stains, other things in the complete blood count picture.
Once the field testing was complete, the samples were shipped to the labs. Some of the samples went to Corvus Labs in San Diego. Others went to the University of Denpasar in Indonesia. But the bulk of the research is being done at the Medical Research Lab at the University of Texas in Arlington.
The samples were received on liquid nitrogen, a small liquid nitrogen canister in cryotubes. And at that point, we cataloged and we transferred them to a permanent liquid nitrogen storage tank.
The first order of business is to confirm that the Komodo saliva is deadly.
The Komodo dragon appears to have a wide variety of bacterial flora in the saliva. Among the flora, we have found some that have a tremendous lethality in mice, kill an awful lot of mice, very rapidly.
So the saliva is deadly. Now the scientists will remove the bacteria from the saliva samples to determine if the bacteria alone is the deadly component.
To remove any of the bacteria that's in the saliva, we wanted to check to see if there was a viral component or mycoplasma or something, a toxin of some sort that was killing the mice. We used a simple filter separation technique, which consists of a syringe and a 0.22 micron filter, so we're removing any bacteria from the saliva. And basically it just twists together. You pull up your sample into the syringe, you attach it to the filter, twist it on, and just force your bacterial solution through, and what comes through is devoid of any bacteria. So we removed the bacteria and then we repeated the design, and we basically found no mortality, or in other words, the mice didn't die once we filtered the saliva.
This is good news. This means that the dragon does appear to kill with bacteria. Therefore, there must be something in the Komodo dragon's immune system that protects it from the bacteria. The next challenge is to isolate and identify the bacteria and to determine which ones are deadly.
We had swabs as well as straight saliva samples. From that, we took the swabs basically out of the cryotubes, streaked them across the surface of the auger, and then we put them in the incubator, let them grow overnight, and came in the next day and looked at colony morphology. In other words, we looked at the bacteria take on a certain colony morphology when they grow, and you can somewhat identify organisms based on their colony morphology. The saliva samples, we basically just took some of the saliva solution out, pipetted it on a plate, and just did a streak plate and looked for bacterial colonies. And then from that we began staining and doing differential selective media to identify the organisms. But at the moment we have probably 60 to 70 organisms identified. A lot of that's duplication. We didn't want to throw anything out until we know for sure that they're duplicated organisms.
The Komodo dragon is able to survive in the presence of a tremendous number of bacteria and a variety of bacteria in its saliva, and these bacteria obviously have access to the blood system because they bleed from their gums and they fight and bite each other. So what in the blood of the Komodo dragon prevents it from dying from bacterial infection? And we wanted to look for that.
The scientists have been able to figure out which type of bacteria is most likely causing the mortality. Through blood cultures performed on the dying mice, it appears that the prey is killed by a bacteria called Pasteurella multocida. Scientists then tested the antibacterial effects of the dragon's serum. The serum killed the bacteria, so there is something in the dragon's blood which gives them a natural defense against bacteria. The next challenge for the scientist is to try and determine what it is, and then use this information to genetically engineer a new medicine for fighting deadly infections. Also, scientists will use the results of these tests to determine which antibiotics to use to save the life of a Komodo bite victim.
Every time I've had an opportunity to go to Komodo Island in Indonesia, I've had an opportunity to learn something that helped me manage these animals more appropriately and manage them well. And I think that it has been extremely important to not just the way the Cincinnati Zoo manages our dragons, which has so far been very successful. Also, it helps me just to understand the animal in general.
If I were to describe what the trip meant to me, it was high adventure. Chance for science to find out something that didn't know before.
As it turns out, these are indeed magic dragons, and the magic is in their blood. As for Terry, with the samples safely frozen away in laboratories, he won't be stuck behind a desk for long. He is already dreaming of his next adventure.
I am the man that the little boy I was wanted me to be.